Hello, Algebra 1. Happy Friday. Here is what we are doing today. We are continuing on with topic 6. And yesterday, you guys figured out how to solve absolute value equations using graphing. We graphed one side, we graphed the other side, and then we were able to figure out where those intersections were. Now, we are going to be introduced to a problem that's a little bit trickier here, and that would be this one. In this problem, we have the absolute value of 2x minus 3 equals 5. And you guys might say, okay, Mrs. Walton, we could definitely graph that. Well, I think it's going to be harder than what you think. So this minus 3 tells me that we have gone to the right by 3. But we have not discussed how to deal with something in front of our x value. You might be surprised to know that that is actually a horizontal stretch. So here is what I would like to show you real quick to show you what this graph looks like. This graph looks like this. If I graph absolute value of 2x minus 3, here's where we're at. We actually did not go to the right by 3. We only went to the right by 1/2. Interesting. But that would be something for a future class, how to deal with horizontal stretches. But this is a little bit harder to graph than what you anticipate. Let's go ahead and go to a problem that we do know how to do, though. And that is going to be solving this by just algebraic methods. And what I want to go back to is, well, what is an absolute value? What does it mean for something to be an absolute value? Well, the absolute value is just a fancy way of saying that this is our distance from 0. That is your distance from 0. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. It is 3 spaces away from 0. The absolute value of -7, well, -7 is 7 units away from 0, so that would be 7. So I want to go ahead and pose this question to you. I want to pose this question. Let's say that we were given this equation here. So we have the absolute value of x is equal to, we'll go with 8. So the absolute value of some number is equal to 8. Now you guys might be thinking, oh, that's a really easy question, Mrs. Walton. The absolute value of some number is equal to 8. Well, that number would have to be 8. And you are correct. 8 is 8 units away from 0. However, we actually have another solution as well. Not only is 8 a solution, but also -8 is also a solution here. So here's what we've got. We have the absolute value of x has equals 8 has two solutions. We have the solution x is equal to +8, and we also have the solution x is equal to -8. So how can we use this back in the other problem? How can we use this back in the other problem? Well, let's think about this. I have something, and its distance from 0 is 5. Now, there are two numbers that could go in here that would get me an absolute value that's equal to 5. Well, here's the deal. First off, we could say, hey, 2x minus 3 could be equal to +5. If I plugged in a +5 in there, I could have the absolute value of 5 is 5. But we could also have another solution there as well. We could also have, hey, 2x minus 3, not only will +5 get me a solution, but also -5 will also get me a solution to this. So here's what I would like for you guys to do. Mr. Parsons is going to go ahead and pause the video. I would like for you guys to solve. We got two equations here. We have this one and we have this one. And I want you to tell me what are the two x values that would make this true. So Mr. Parsons, go ahead and pause the video. Students, I need an x value here and an x value here. All right, so let's find our two solutions. First off, for this one on the left, where is this going to be equal to +5? If I add 3 to both sides, I'm left with 2x is equal to 8. Let's go and divide by 2. Divide by 2. I have the value x is equal to 4. So that is one x value that would make this a true statement. Now, let's go ahead and solve this one. If I add 3, I have 2x is equal to, well, -5 plus 3 is -2. Divide by 2, divide by 2. I have x is equal to -1. Now, a few different ways that we could show that our answer is correct for those of us who just really want to be sure. Well, let's go ahead and plug this back into our initial equation. Let's plug that back in. So if I plug in 4 for this, well, here's what I'm left with. I'm left with the absolute value of 2 times 4 minus 3. Well, 2 times 4 is 8, so I have absolute value of 8 minus 3. And finally, 8 minus 3 is 5. The absolute value of 5, sure enough, is equal to 5. Now let's go ahead and try this value. If I plug this in, absolute value of 2 times negative 1 minus 3. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, so I have absolute value of negative 2 minus 3. And here, negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5, and sure enough, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. So both of these do check out. Now, some of us might not trust our arithmetic here, so you could also graph this. If I were to go back to my graph and graph it, say, hey, I want to know, where is this equal to 5? Where is this equal to 5? Well, sure enough, here are my two x values. I have an x value at negative 1, and I also have an x value at 4. So my two solutions are negative 1 and 4. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next problem. Here's what I've got for my next problem. I have absolute value of x over 5 is equal to 1. I want to know, what are the two values of x that would make this true? So, Mr. Parsons, go ahead and pause the video. Students, I want you to find what two values of x would make this a true equation. So, go for it. Here are my two solutions for this one. So, first off, we could have some number divided by 5 equals 1, and some number divided by 5 equals negative 1. Guys, please do not overthink these fractions. Some of you guys see a fraction and you freak out right off the bat. This is just a fancy way of saying we're dividing by 5. And what is the opposite of dividing? Multiplying. So let's go ahead and multiply both sides by 5. Multiply both sides by 5. My first solution is positive 5. And that's kind of a duh statement. 5 divided by 5 is 1. Absolute value of 1 is 1. Same thing over here. Multiply by 5. Multiply by 5. My other solution is x equals negative 5. And yet again, don't overthink that one. If I have negative 5 divided by 5, negative 5 divided by 5 is negative 1. Absolute value of negative 1 is 1. So that does check out as well. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next equation, our next problem here. And here's what I've got. I have negative 5 times the absolute value of 3 plus 4x is equal to negative 115. And the one thing that's really kind of sticking out to me right here is this negative 5. And I want to go back to an easier problem. I'm going to write down an easier problem for you guys, and then I want you to tell me how we would go about doing this. So let's go to an easier problem here. If I were to tell you guys that I have negative 5 times something equals negative 115, and I just wanted to get this by itself, well, how do I get rid of that multiplication? We would divide it. Divide by negative 5. Divide by negative 5. This is the same thing that we're going to do in this next problem. I need to get this absolute value by itself first before I start breaking things off. Let's go ahead and go back to our problem. Here's what we've got. We have negative 5 times the absolute value of 3 plus 4x equals negative 115. And if I look at that, let's go ahead and look right here. Same thing. I have negative 5 times something, and I need this something to be by itself. Let's go ahead and divide by negative 5. Divide by negative 5. An absolute value of 3 plus 4x is equal to, well, if I have a negative 115 divided by negative 5, that is positive 23. And now I'm ready to break this off into my two equations. So here's what I would like for you guys to do. And it is okay if you get a fraction for one of these or a decimal. Relax. It is okay to have decimal answers. So what I would like for you guys to do right now, go ahead and break this off and get me the two x values where this would be equal to 23. So Mr. Parsons, go ahead and pause the video. All right, here are my solutions. First off, I went ahead and set this equal to positive 23. When I solved that, I had a nice beautiful answer. X is equal to 5, a nice integer answer. Now over here, when I had my negative 23, negative 23 minus 3 is negative 26. Negative 26 divided by 4, you could leave that as a fraction. You could leave that as negative 13 over 2. Or if you wanted to be decimal E, you could have left that as negative 6.5. So those are my two answers. We have two more examples to look at. And they are right here. Now, same thing that we've got going on here. I have a 3. I have a negative sign there. And then I need to get this by itself. I need to get my absolute value by itself. So do not overthink this. Just like if this were just a 3 out in front, how do I get rid of a positive 3? I would subtract it. How do I get rid of a negative out in front? You would go ahead and divide by it. So let's go ahead and look at this one together. I have 3 minus absolute value of 8x minus 6 is equal to positive 3. So let's look at this. All right. So just like I said, how do I get rid of a positive 3 out front? Let's go ahead and subtract it. And then this negative, this is just a fancy way to say negative 1 out front. No need to overthink that one. And 3 minus 3 is 0. Oh, this is kind of cool. All right, so now to get rid of that multiplication, I am going to divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1. And I'm left with absolute value of 8x minus 6 equals 0. Now, I know you guys are super trained to do one side. It's not needed in this problem, though. Let's think about why. In the previous problems, here's what I've had. In the previous problem, I had 23, positive 23, negative 23. In this problem, I had, boom, positive 5 and negative 5. We actually don't need to do it in this case. Let's think about it. If I were to go about doing that, I would end up with positive 0 and negative 0. Now, some of you guys would probably like to debate me on this one, but there's no difference between positive 0 and negative 0. It's just 0. So, solving this, I don't need to break it up into 2. I just need to know, hey, 8x minus 6 is equal to 0. If I add 6, I'm left with 8x is equal to 6. And divide by 8, x equals, well, 6 out of 8 is 3/4. Or another way of saying that is 0.75. And I do want to show you the graph on this one because it's going to be exactly what you kind of anticipate here. All right, so that is my solution. I am going to go ahead and graph this just to show you guys what this graph looks like. What does it mean if we only have one solution? Well, my one side was 3 minus absolute value of 8x minus 6. And I want to know, when is this at a height of 3? What? Only at one point. So whenever you get to the point where you have the absolute value equals 0, you know that it's going to be a solution where we only have one value of x that would make that true. So this is only one solution. All right, last problem, my favorite problem. I know some of you guys are going to immediately say, oh, cool, we got this by itself. We've got negative 4 and positive 4. Remember what absolute values are. Absolute value is saying, hey, what is my distance from 0? Can I be a distance of negative 4 away from 0? No, you can't go to a wood shop and measure out negative 4 inches or negative 4 centimeters. So this one is actually my favorite answer. No work needed. If I have an absolute value that is by itself is equal to a negative number, this is no solution. And I'm going to graph this one so you guys can see what it looks like, but this one is going to be no solution. So here's what this graph looks like. We have the absolute value of, what was it? Absolute value of 1 minus 5x. We have the absolute value of 1 minus 5x. And then I want to know, when is that equal to negative 4? Never. We're up here. There's no possible way that this could be a negative number. There's no intersection, so there is no solution. So here's your homework for the weekend. You guys have 1, 2, 3. You have page 159, and you guys have 8 problems. And I'm going to warn you, be careful. There might be some that are no solutions. If you get it to where you have an absolute value equal to a negative all by itself, that would be a no solution. So here's what you're working with. Answer key will be up at the front for you guys to check. I hope you have a great Friday and a great weekend.